Hi, I'm Gene Cornacchia. At St. Peter's University, we believe that all citizens need to understand the importance of higher education and how it affects our lives. That's why we're proud to support the important programming produced by the Caucus Educational Corporation.
State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is brought to you from the Agnes Veris NJTV studio at 2 Gateway. Funding has been provided by St. Peter's University, the Jesuit University of New Jersey, JFK Medical Center, QualCare Inc., a managed care company administrating health plans that care about your health care, Fedway Associates, New Jersey State Nurses Association and the Institute for Nursing, Verizon, and by Suez, ready for the resource revolution.
State of Affairs. I'm Steve Adubato, coming to you from the Agnes Veris NJTV studio in Newark, New Jersey. It is our pleasure to welcome Mike Duhaime, Republican strategist and partner at Mercury. Mercury is
a public affairs firm, high-stakes public strategy. We do things like polling, advertising, crisis management, PR, that type of work.
People have crises?
A few of them, yeah.
Mike also was one of the key political strategists for Governor Chris Christie, and it's worked on presidential campaigns as well. Rudy Giuliani, no? Back in the day?
I managed Rudy's race. I worked on President George W. Bush's race as well, and Senator McCain as well, so a handful of them.
As young as you are, you've had incredible experiences on state and national political issues. The tone of our political discourse today, Mike, as toxic as it appears?
Yeah, it is. It's bad. I think you can talk about the reasons why, but it's not something new either. I think there's so much heightened anxiety now. We act as if it's new, that the last election cycle. Now maybe it was worse than usual, but it's certainly not new. Certainly there's been time over, I think, the last 20 years where this has ebbed and flowed a bit. But it's at a peak now, but it's certainly not new. And quite frankly, it goes all the way back to the founding. I mean, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams went at it in 1800 like people have never done before. They didn't have cable TV then, so it's not a scene.
They also didn't have Twitter.
No, they had no Twitter at the time.
So let's do this. The impact that you see President Trump having, A, on the discourse in our country, and B, his ability to potentially get things done that matter in people's lives, which is how he got elected.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll take the second part first. I think the ability to get things done right now is being strangled by the day-to-day controversy. I mean, the more we talk about whether it's the Russia investigation or any controversy that comes up, the less we're talking about a bill on infrastructure, the less we're talking about tax reform, the less we're debating the merits of health care reform. And those are big, weighty issues, but they're all sidetracked right now. And ultimately, he'll be judged, and Congress will be judged on whether or not they get things done. And without the ability to have any kind of public discourse or debate, it makes that all a lot harder.
Would you, if you were advising the president, how would you tell him or advise him to try to get back on track? Or is it literally impossible to focus on the business of this nation while these things are happening?
Well, I think it's certainly harder while these things are happening. But one thing that President Trump has shown during his time as a candidate, and even before he was ever a candidate, is the ability to suck the oxygen out of the media cycle and have everyone focus on what he wants them to focus on. He was expert at that during the campaign. There were a dozen other good candidates in the race, including our governor. But he was able to refocus everyone on him when he needed to do that. I think he still has that ability. He's choosing to have them focus on things that probably don't help him in terms of the policy agenda that we just spoke about, but he certainly has the ability to do it.
Last question on Trump. Campaigning, governing, huge difference?
It's a huge difference. Certainly, campaigning, just the campaign itself is a small structure, a small group of people around. And then when you go to work in the federal government, the United States government is the largest operation in the world. You need to delegate a lot more than you do in a campaign. You need to set a vision and then have good people around you. I think what he really needs are people around him who can help implement a vision. Whether you agree with the vision or not, what he doesn't have right now are people that can help him implement, help him do things in the agencies to actually bring about some of the change that he promised.
Let's bring it back closer to home. This race in 2017 to replace Governor Christie will be fought on what grounds between Democrat Phil Murphy and Republican Kim Guadagno?
I think Phil Murphy would like to have it on kind of broad grounds of ideological grounds, kind of liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat. New Jersey's a very Democrat state, 750,000 more Democrats than Republicans, ideologically leaning more and more to the left. I think it will try to keep it on those grounds.
Will he try, excuse me, Mike, will he in fact try to make it about Chris Christie and whatever he thinks is unpopular about the governor? Will he try to go back and do that?
I think he will try to do that on Chris Christie. I think he'll try to also do it on Donald Trump to bring in what we just talked about. Anything he can do to show that I'm kind of the Democrat, the progressive in a progressive state, I think will be what he tries to do. I think Lieutenant Governor needs to make the sell that there have been some positive things that have happened in the last 8 years. You need a Republican in the executive branch to counter the legislative branch, which has tried to raise taxes, tried to increase spending, and that this balance of power has worked for New Jersey. Unemployment is half of what it was 8 years ago. There are hundreds of thousands of new jobs. The private sector is growing while the public sector has shrunk. To make that case is not as easy as a Republican because you know you're kind of going uphill, but you kind of know that going into a race.
Let me ask you this. Governor Christie, you've enjoyed a very close professional and personal relationship, and we intend to sit down with Governor Christie, hopefully for a powerful, poignant, and important retrospective conversation at the appropriate time as his term ends. But how do you look at his 7.5 going on 8 years as governor? Big picture, how do you look at it?
I feel he's done some really difficult things and made a great deal of progress in the state. I look at the things he's tried to tackle, such as pension reform as an example. That New Jersey has some almost intractable problems that are set in place by the Supreme Court in New Jersey in terms of mandating certain amounts of spending, whether it's on education, pension reform, things of that nature. He has tried to make big differences, and he's made them. He also inherited the state at a time when the budget and the unemployment numbers were in shambles. He was able to turn the ship around, right the direction of the state, while at the same time taking on some major crises that came his way. Superstorm Sandy obviously comes to the level that he's somebody who I believe is a true leader. He rose to the occasion at that moment, while at the same time trying to take on intractable problems and work with Democrats. One of the things I don't think at this stage of his tenure gets enough credit for is how well he's worked across the aisle, bringing Republicans and Democrats together to make some of these reforms.
Bridgegate. Once it happened, and once the coverage in the media around it happened, the trial happens. Public opinions shaped by those things and others. Excuse my voice, allergies. I say every time I'm taping my voice like this, I just want to tell you, hopefully it won't be my normal voice for long. What impact do you think that has had on the governor's ability to do what he has wanted to do in his second term?
It's definitely had an impact. I think it's made it less likely that people have wanted to work with him. This certainly came about at a time when he was very popular. He had just been reelected with a historic margin, over 60% of the vote, and certainly was being talked about as a potential presidential candidate or even frontrunner at that time. I think certainly our proximity to New York and the national media market made this a bigger story than maybe it would have been in another state. But I think what it meant for his second-term agenda was that people who had been willing to cross the aisle, Democrats specifically, been willing to cross the aisle to work with him on policy items in the first term were much less likely to, as his poll numbers went down. I mean, I know it's crazy in politics that politicians would pay attention to those things, but they do. So it became less popular to work with him, and therefore much harder when you're in the minority party.
One more question on Chris Christie in connection with the presidential race. You were a key player in that. There's no one reason why a campaign doesn't have the outcome that it wants to. What do you think the reasons Chris Christie's presidential campaign played out the way it did? And is that reason ultimately Donald Trump?
Donald Trump is probably the biggest reason. I think Chris Christie would have taken that, the mantle of the person kind of saying what he thinks.
In spite of the challenges connected to Bridgegate and anything else the governor was carrying from New Jersey, you still feel like he would have been the odds-on favorite?
I think he would have been, I don't know if he'd been the odds-on favorite, very strong field, but he would have been very competitive at that point. And the other thing which I think people in New Jersey don't always appreciate is just how hard it is for someone who's perceived as a moderate from the Northeast to do well in a Republican primary. I worked for Rudy Giuliani. I worked for Chris Christie.
Moderates.
Who are perceived as even more moderate than they are. If you ask people in New Jersey, they're going to say those guys are conservative, certainly Chris Christie.
What are they in the rest of the country? What do they look like?
They look like Northeastern moderates. They work with Democrats. We heard much less about Bridgegate than we did about working with President Obama during Superstorm Sandy.
Like, how dare Chris Christie work with Obama as the president?
Yes,
The
Republicans.
governor told us, he said, I did my job.
Republicans in other parts of the country saw that as some sort of betrayal of Republican values, that you would work with the president during a time of crisis. Not all Republicans, obviously, but there were some very conservative folks who just said, okay, this guy must not be like us. He must not be conservative enough.
What do you mean like us? Mike, so what does that say about the Republican Party? And enough of them, particularly Tea Party folks, what do they really want?
Well, there's enough. But my faith always comes back to the folks who are more moderate do tend to win. John McCain, Donald Trump is certainly not the most conservative person in the primary, and he was able to win as well.
We're talking about candidate Trump at a certain time, pre-candidate Trump, or President Trump?
All one and the same.
Trump.
All one and the same. Well, in terms of what it meant to people at the time, it was candidate and pre-candidate Trump. He was more. People thought he was the guy from The Apprentice. We, again, living in this media market, we know Donald Trump for 50 years. Most people in the rest of the country were introduced to Donald Trump through The Apprentice and thought that was the guy.
That was an advantage for him?
A huge advantage for him. Name identification.
The Apprentice?
Two things. Huge name identification. We think everybody knows who Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush is. They don't. Everybody knew who Donald Trump was. And they looked at this guy that he's a boss. He is a guy who makes decisions. He fires people. And that's what we need in the Oval Office.
It's a TV show with it.
I know, but marketing and branding was everything, and he is master at that.
How much do you get concerned about the fact that you are a moderate? You interact with all kinds of people, including Democrats at your firm at Mercury. And there are policies in Washington, healthcare being one. I'm not going to get into the minutia of it, but I'm betting, Mike Duhaime, that you're concerned about potentially a significant number of people, particularly those on Medicaid, particularly those who are struggling, older people, potentially getting thrown off or having it be harder for them to get their health insurance. Loaded question, I know. I'm not buying that you believe in that.
Well, I can go through policy by policy where I believe what I don't, but I do not consider myself. I do have concerns, and I do have concerns specifically on health care, and I'm not dogmatic in that I agree with everything my party does, but anything. Republican and Democrat, you kind of have to pick one if you want to make progress, but it doesn't mean you have to buy into everything either party. And I think the best people from both parties understand that each one of the parties falls short in certain areas. Certainly on health care, as someone who's a Catholic, a Christian, I believe we need to take care of the poor. I think New Jersey did the right thing with a Republican governor and a Democrat legislature coming together to expand Medicaid for people who need it, and that's what government should do.
Not every state did that.
Not every state.
Christie led that effort. Democrats were with him.
He did, and I think certainly Republicans need to do a better job of explaining, because most Republicans want to do that. They don't want to kick poor people off and get out of their health care, but they do want it to be delivered more efficiently. They don't want to waste taxpayer dollars. Republicans need to explain why this is going to work for people who need it, not just have it be a statistic about we're throwing people off.
Mike Duhaime is a Republican strategist and partner at Mercury and has been a key player, a consultant, a campaign manager at the state, at the national level, and we thank him for joining us.
Thanks,
State of Affairs.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
State of Affairs. I think we'll be right back right after this if I keep talking. Thanks, Mike.
Good. Thank you.
New Jersey is about to elect a new governor. This fall, I'll be sitting down with Democratic candidate Phil Murphy and Republican candidate Kim Guadagno. So what do you think the #1 challenge is facing New Jersey's next governor? Share your thoughts with me on Twitter at Steve Adubato. Do it now. Let your voice be heard, because democracy is not a spectator sport. State of Affairs is honored to have United States Congressman Josh Gottheimer, who is from the 5th Congressional District. Good to see you, Congressman.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Anything happening in Washington?
No, nothing to see. Yeah.
By the way, tell folks real quick about your background before you got to the United States Congress.
Most recently, I was at Microsoft. I spent time at Ford Motor Company. And early in my career, I was a speechwriter for President Bill Clinton. So in and out of the private sector.
Let's talk about speechwriting, tone, tenor. We're doing this in the summer, moving toward July.
Yeah.
It'll be seen very soon. The reaction to the horrific, excuse my voice, the reaction to the horrific events in Virginia involving members of Congress playing baseball, staff, and one of your colleagues who was seriously injured. What's been the reaction?
It was a tough week last week, and the last, I think overall this just brought to bear what a lot of us know, right? I mean, it's just the polarization in politics overall it's
How polarized are we, Josh?
I mean, I think if you read social media or watch the news or you listen to how people speak about each other, I think it's way too polarized. But what's interesting, and I've seen this in Washington now, I've just been down there since January, so I'm new. But what you realize is that most of us across the aisle, and I spend a lot of time speaking to Democrats and Republicans because I think that's very important, most of us get along really well and people treat each other nicely. What happens is, the cable shows and the social media, and just how, and the institution isn't built right now to encourage people to work together, right? It's you almost, you're disincentivized to. So those of us who are spending a lot of time working across the aisle, and I co-chair something called the Problem Solvers Caucus.
Right.
And so I'm very focused on, let's sit down and actually talk to each other. I believe the best way to settle things down and work, and we've got to lessen this polarization, is to actually talk to each other. And you know, if you know this, if you've done business with people, it starts with relationships, and those relationships are really important.
However, on policy, part of our country, a big part of our country, is disagreeing, doing it vehemently but respectfully. You have serious questions, and we're doing this program, as we said, toward the last week of June. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with the United States Senate and the deliberations around repealing the Affordable Care Act and replacing it. What are your thoughts?
You know, talking about bipartisan engagement, unfortunately on this health care bill, this was not one of those moments where Democrats and Republicans sat down. It was sort of a partisan bill and kind of jammed through. And whereas things like tax reform and infrastructure, there's a lot more bipartisan work going on to try to get somewhere. This health care bill, and we'll see what happens through the Senate and how this ultimately turns out. But I'll tell you, what passed out of the House was not good for New Jersey.
Why?
The biggest reason, I mean, there's several reasons. One, Medicaid dollars and resources to the state. We pay some of the highest taxes in the country, and we get some of the worst return for our tax dollars.
So hold on one second.
Yeah.
Medicaid is being talked about, and the argument that's made by President Trump and others who support this effort are, hey, wait a minute, what are we talking about? It's a block grant. We let the states control it. Let the states control Medicaid, you say?
Well, so here's the issue. For New Jersey, and my job is to represent the state of New Jersey, and specifically the 5th Congressional District, Northern New Jersey.
We should tell people where the 5th is?
Bergen, Sussex, Warren, and Passaic counties. So northwest part of the state. Here's the problem. The Medicaid resources that we've been getting under this legislation will go way down, to the tune of a $4,000 tax hit for each family in the state of New Jersey. So the dollars that we've been getting, the resources we've been getting, that have been coming under the ACA, will, under this change, proposed change, will go significantly down, and will hit our pocketbooks in New Jersey, right? And I just don't think we can afford another $4,000 family hit. One, two, if you are over 50, you get hit with something called the senior tax. You look better. called the senior tax, right?
Right.
It allows insurance companies to charge more than 5 times what they would charge people under 50. 5 times in premiums, 5 times, right? Then you have something, another hit on Medicaid. You know, Medicaid covers a lot of long-term care facilities. A lot of our parents and grandparents are in facilities. So 3 out of 5 of them will lose, under this legislation, will take a significant hit. And talking to many facilities, many may not be able to provide care anymore, and you could actually throw seniors out of their nursing homes. So this is just practical reality, right? And you know, many of us think we need to fix the ACA. I'll be the first one. I campaign on it.
And many Republicans argue, Congressman, that we have to lower cost, and the ACA created more cost, and we have to change this, and it's not fair to small business owners. And they need to make these changes, you say?
Well, first of all, I've worked very hard on, actually, I voted for legislation so that we can work with small business owners and co-ops and ways to take that on. And I'm not saying we don't need to fix the ACA. I campaigned on fixing the ACA. This is not a fix. It's a gut job, right? It's going to hurt, and it's not a fix. And it's very bad for us in New Jersey and for seniors.
Why would the Republicans do this?
I don't know. You got to really ask them.
No, but you've talked to them. Why do they say they're doing it?
I feel like they think they need to deliver on. They spent 7 years saying we're going to throw out Obamacare, right? 7 years saying it, and I think they feel like they've got to deliver. And by the way, I'm not saying we shouldn't fix it, but it takes sitting down in a room, just like you and I are sitting here at this table. It takes us sitting down and actually saying, okay, let's be constructive in how we fix it. Like, I'm against the Cadillac tax. I think the medical device tax in it, both 2 provisions in it right now that need to go. And I can give you a laundry list of other provisions that we got to deal with, but this is not a solution.
But Congressman, many of the people who voted for Donald Trump appear to be the ones, based on the Congressional Budget Office analysis, as 23 to 24 million Americans may potentially lose their insurance. Many of the people who voted for Donald Trump are some of the ones who are going to be adversely impacted by this. Do you think people know that?
You know, I hope that people are getting the facts. Do I think people all know that that what they'll suddenly qualify as a pre-existing condition, right? It's not just if you had cancer or have other diseases. There's also these other pre-existing conditions. If a woman had a C-section, you're suddenly, that's considered a pre-existing condition, and they can charge you more, deny certain services.
An insurance
to
company
you.
can.
Insurance company can, because it'll be considered a pre-existing condition. Here's another provision. If you throw out the ACA, throw it out, not fix it, you throw it out. Do you know what the donut hole is? That's
yes.
right. It can the
you're
ACA,
talking about Medicaid D?
Exactly.
Medicaid Part D. Right, Congressman's going to explain this.
Right. It's our Medicare Part D. Right, where you close. So over time, it's what your parents or grandparents or all of us pay up front for prescription drugs. Then there's a gap that comes out of your pocket, and then Medicare picks it back up again. If you kill the ACA, and the ACA was closing that hole. By 2020, it'd be gone. There'd be no gap. This blows it right back open. $2,000 a year to seniors. If you take a lot of prescription drugs, it costs you $2,000 a year. These are just facts, and you're exactly right. We just have to get the facts out. There are plenty of things that we can work on together. I'm just worried about the way this is being done.
A couple things. Number one, there is going to be a member of the congressional delegation who happens to be Republican on a future edition, hopefully the next time we join you, on the next taping of State of Affairs, that will offer a different perspective. Not that every Republican agrees with what's going on.
But you know that 3 out of the 5 of our Republican delegation voted against the bill.
I do know that,
Yeah.
but we are going to get a member of the delegation who did vote for the bill and offer a different perspective.
Okay.
Donald Trump, you say?
That's a broad question.
That's the question.
What specifically?
What impact do you think he's had on the nation in terms of our ability to solve the serious problems we have? I'll be more specific.
Yeah. Well, here's what I think. I am hopeful that, and what I'm telling you, how I'm approaching this, I believe if you want to get things done, you have to work with all the parties.
Can you work with President Trump?
I met with the White House last week.
No, not the White House. Do you think you can work with President Trump? You could sit, if you got a chance to sit with President Trump.
Would I sit? Of course.
Do you think you could have a meaningful conversation about policy?
I would hope so. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I would hope that we, whether, and I, by the way, worked with talking to the White House on tax reform, on infrastructure, on issues that I believe are critical to us. And we've got to fix, we can't have the 9th worst roads in the country. You can't have it that we had the worst on-time numbers in the country, New Jersey Transit last year. That's not okay. So we have
the president's
issues.
Committed to doing something about infrastructure?
He says he is.
You think he's ever going to get to it, what's going on in terms of the investigations at every level?
I'm still confident that we can, so I am still part of the group that's confident that if we actually sit down and work together with the White House, with the Senate, we can get tax reform done, we can get infrastructure done. I think they need to go together.
Define tax reform, be specific. What does it mean?
Getting the rates down, closing a bunch of the loopholes up in the shelters, getting the rates down across the board. You can't have it, our tax rates on businesses are the highest in all the OECD countries in the world. All the big countries around the world, we have the highest tax rates. It's actually forcing jobs overseas and companies to leave, as you know, our country. That's not okay, right? So I think we need to get, in New Jersey, our taxes are out of control, right? They just are at every level. You add it up and it's causing businesses and people to leave. We're not gaining, we're losing people. And millennials, whether you're a millennial or you're a senior, you're leaving our state. I believe we've got an incredible place. We live in an incredible place, incredible schools, beautiful parks. I love raising my kids here. We need to make sure that going forward, we do everything possible so that we stay that way.
You think President Trump is dangerous?
I think he's dangerous?
Yes.
No, I think that...
You don't think he's dangerous to this nation?
Well, it depends in what area. Do I think what he's doing
Do you think the way the president
policy?
communicates publicly, primarily through social media / Twitter, do you think it's dangerous for this country?
I really believe it's unhelpful that he tweets out things in the middle of the night. I think the best way to actually engage is to have constructive conversation.
He argues that he needs to communicate directly with the American people, you say?
I don't mind people engaging directly. I engage directly with my...
You do. You have very strong social media operation.
With my constituents. But I think it's how you do it. And, I think it's really important. Tone is really important. If you want to make sure that you started this conversation by talking about last week. If we want to make sure that we have constructive conversation, you've got to be careful in the words you choose, right? I mean, it's something I learned very early in my career. You've got to be smart about the words you choose. And I have no problem with the president communicating directly. I just want to make sure it's how we communicate with each other is really important.
You're optimistic. It's interesting. You ran in a very nasty, ugly race. You have a minute left. Scott Garrett was the incumbent.
Right.
Do you believe campaigns can really be run on the issues, on the merits, without the personal attacks? Or is this just the way it is?
So I ran on a lot of issues. So I believe you're going to...
They got nasty. Your race got nasty.
It did unfortunately get
Is that
nasty.
just the way it gets, Josh? Congressman, is that just the way it is?
No, please call me Josh. I would hope so. I would hope that we can run more constructive races and not actually have to get into that stuff. But also, I believe you run things on the difference of issues. And my campaign actually was about the difference, really on the difference between the candidates. And I think it's okay to talk about the difference between candidates. But let's get to the issues first.
That's not dirty or nasty. That's just healthy.
Yeah, that's getting into the issues,
Yes.
you know? And so I think there's a difference between personal attacks and getting into the issues.
Congressman Josh Gottheimer, 5th Congressional District. I want to thank you for joining us. Don't let it be the last time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for this joining us this edition of State of Affairs. Continue the conversation. Follow me on Twitter at Steve Adubato. Promise. See you next time. Thank you, Josh.
State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 25 years of broadcast excellence. State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is brought to you from the Agnes Varus NJTV studio at 2 Gateway. Funding has been provided by St. Peter's University, JFK Medical Center, Qual Care Inc., Fedway Associates, New Jersey State Nurses Association, and the Institute for Nursing, Verizon, and by Suez. Promotional support provided by Observer New Jersey Politics, and by Commerce Magazine.
The New Jersey State Nurses Association is a leading advocate for nurses. Healthcare succeeds when each member of the team works together, and nurses are an integral part of that process. We support our nurses through continuing education, we monitor the latest healthcare trends, and we work to ensure that nurses have a seat at the table when healthcare legislation is being passed. Producing the highest quality patient outcomes is our mission, because caring for you is what matters most to us.